The first gunshot shattered the pre-dawn stillness, jolting Julianne Crawford from her fitful sleep. The second shot brought her fully awake, heart hammering against her ribs as she scrambled to light the oil lamp beside her bed. It wasn't unusual to hear gunfire in Willow Creek, Colorado, not in 1876, but these shots were close, too close to the small homestead she'd inherited from her late husband. "Mama," a small voice called from the doorway. 8-year-old Emma stood clutching her rag doll, her younger brother Thomas peering fearfully around her skirts. "It's all right," Julianne assured them, though she wasn't certain of that herself. "Stay inside while I check." Throwing a shawl over her nightdress, Julianne took the rifle from above the door, one of the few things she knew how to use properly since Michael's death 6 months ago. The weight of it felt awkward in her hands, a constant reminder of all she didn't know about surviving in this harsh land. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Julianne stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. At first, she saw nothing but the familiar silhouettes of distant mountains and the outline of their struggling vegetable garden. Then movement caught her eye, a figure on horseback approaching slowly, another horse in tow. "Stop right there," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "State your business," the rider halted. "Madam, I mean no harm," the voice was deep, tired. "Name's Yates Morgan. I was tracking some rustlers when they got the drop on me. They're gone now, but my horse took a bullet." As if to confirm his story, Julianne could see the second horse limping badly. "I saw your chimney smoke yesterday," the stranger continued. "Hoped I might find help here." Julianne hesitated. A woman alone with 2 children couldn't be too careful, but neither could she turn away someone in genuine need. That wasn't how Michael would have wanted her to live. "Come closer, slowly," she instructed. "But know that I'm not afraid to use this rifle." The man moved forward into the growing light, and Julianne got her first clear look at him. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat easy in the saddle despite what appeared to be a bloodstain on his left arm. His face was weathered, with several days' worth of beard, but his eyes, even in the dim light, seemed kind. "You're hurt," she observed. "Just a graze. The horse got the worst of it." Behind her, the door creaked open. "Mama," Emma's voice trembled. "It's all right," Julianne said, not taking her eyes off the stranger. "Mr. Morgan here has an injured horse." "Can we help him?" Thomas asked, his 6-year-old curiosity momentarily overcoming his fear. Something in the children's innocent concern made Julianne's decision. "Bring your horse to the barn, Mr. Morgan. I'll see what we can do." An hour later, Yates Morgan sat at her kitchen table while Julianne cleaned and bandaged his arm. The wound was indeed just a graze, but it had bled enough to weaken him. His horse was resting in their small barn, though Julianne wasn't sure if the animal would recover. "You have a gentle touch, Mrs. Crawford, Julianne Crawford." She tied off the bandage. "And I should. My father was a doctor back in Pennsylvania. You're a long way from home." "Yes." She didn't elaborate. The story of how she'd followed her husband west with dreams of building a life, only to lose him to pneumonia shortly after they'd finally secured this homestead, wasn't one she wanted to share with a stranger, no matter how kind his eyes seemed. Emma and Thomas watched from the corner, fascinated by their visitor. It had been months since anyone but the occasional traveling peddler had stopped by. "Are you a real cowboy?" Thomas finally blurted out. Yates smiled, the expression transforming his rugged face. "I suppose I am. I work cattle for the Rockingham Ranch about 20 miles north of here." "Do you have a gun?" Thomas asked, eyes wide. "Thomas," Julianne scolded. Yates chuckled. "It's all right. Yes, young man, I do, but I only use it when absolutely necessary." "Like with those rustlers?" Emma asked. "The very same. They've been stealing cattle all through this territory. I was sent to track them, but they were better prepared than I expected." Julianne set a cup of coffee before him. "You're welcome to rest here until you're stronger, but I should warn you, we don't have much to offer." For the first time, Yates took a proper look around the cabin. It was clean but sparse, showing signs of neglect that spoke of struggle. A broken chair leaned against one wall, waiting for repairs. The roof had a visible patch where water had once leaked through. "I'm grateful for anything, Mrs. Crawford." His gaze returned to her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes, the strain around her mouth despite her youth. She couldn't be more than 25, yet she carried herself with the weariness of someone much older. "Will you tell us a story, Mr. Morgan?" Emma asked hopefully. "About being a cowboy, Emma. Mr. Morgan needs to rest," Julian began. "I don't mind," Yates interrupted. "Been a while since I had such an appreciative audience." As Yates began a tale about a cattle drive through a thunderstorm, Julian busied herself with breakfast preparations, trying not to notice how her children's faces had come alive with interest. It had been so long since she'd heard them truly laugh the way they did at Yates's colorful descriptions of cowboys trying to corral terrified cattle while lightning split the sky. "Mama never laughs anymore," Thomas said suddenly during a pause in the story. Julian froze, mortified, a bowl of cornmeal clutched in her hands. Yates's eyes met hers across the room. "Well," he said gently, "sometimes life makes it hard to find things to laugh about, but I promise you this, young Thomas people can always find laughter again, even in the hardest times." "Will Mama laugh here again?" Emma asked seriously. "I believe she will," Yates said, never breaking his gaze from Julian's. "This seems like a good place for laughter to grow back with children like you two to help it along." Something shifted in Julian's chest, not healing, not yet, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. "Breakfast is ready," she said softly, turning away before he could see the moisture in her eyes. Yates Morgan ended up staying 3 days. His arm healed quickly, but his horse needed more time. During those days, he made himself useful in ways Julian hadn't realized she needed. He repaired the broken chair, reinforced the leaky roof, and split enough firewood to last weeks. On the second day, when Julian returned from gathering eggs, she found him showing Emma and Thomas how to properly care for their aging milk cow. "You'll get more milk if you treat her gently," he was explaining as he demonstrated the correct way to milk. "Animals know when you respect them." "Pa used to do the milking," Thomas said matter-of-factly. "Mama tries, but Bessie doesn't give her much milk." "Well, that's because your mama has had to learn a lot of new things all at once," Yates said, his tone conversational but his eyes understanding when they met Julian's over the children's heads. "Sometimes it takes time to get the hang of things." That evening, after the children were asleep, Julian found Yates on the porch staring at the stars. She brought him a cup of coffee and, after a moment's hesitation, sat beside him on the step. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all your help and for being kind to the children." "They're good kids. You've done well with them," Julian sighed. "I try, but this isn't the life I thought we'd have. What happened to their father, if you don't mind my asking?" She hadn't spoken of it much, not even to the few neighbors scattered miles apart. But something about the night and the man beside her loosened her tongue. "Michael died of pneumonia last winter. We'd only been here 4 months. She wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup, drawing warmth from it. "He had such dreams for this place. Wanted to build a proper farm, raise horses eventually. But then the cough started, and within 2 weeks, she trailed off, the familiar ache rising in her throat. "I'm sorry," Yates said simply. "The worst part is that I don't know what I'm doing here," Julian admitted. "I was a doctor's daughter from Philadelphia. I knew nothing about farming or ranching. Michael was teaching me, but there was so much I hadn't learned yet." "Why stay?" His question held no judgment, only curiosity. "Where would I go? My parents died in a fire the year before we left. I have no family back east, and the children." She looked toward the cabin where they slept. "This is the only home Thomas really remembers, and I promised Michael I'd try." They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and distant coyotes filling the space between them. "The rocking M could use a good hand like you," Julian finally said. "Once your horse is healed," Yates nodded slowly. "I should get back, been gone longer than planned already." Something like disappointment flickered through her, which was ridiculous. Of course he would leave. "Everyone did eventually, but I'd like to come back," he added, his voice dropping lower. "Check on you and the children, maybe bring some supplies. We're not charity cases, Mr. Morgan. Didn't say you were, Mrs. Crawford." There was a smile in his voice. "But neighbors help neighbors out here. That's how people survive. We're hardly neighbors at 20 miles apart. Out here, that's practically next door." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Look, I know you've got your pride. But winter's coming in a few months, and from what I can see, you're not prepared. Let me help, not for charity, but because it's the right thing to do." Julianne wanted to refuse, to prove she could manage on her own. But the memory of last winter, the bitter cold, the dwindling food, Michael's worsening cough rose up vividly. "All right," she conceded, "but I'll find a way to repay any debt." Yates smiled. "I've no doubt of that, Mrs. Crawford." The next morning, Yates's horse was moving better, though still favoring its injured leg. After breakfast, he prepared to leave, borrowing Julian's ancient mare to ride back to the Rockingham, promising to return her when he came back. The children were inconsolable. "But you can't go." Thomas wailed, clinging to Yates's leg. "Who'll teach me to be a cowboy?" "I'll be back, partner," Yates assured him, ruffling his hair. "And when I come, I'll bring more stories." Emma, more reserved but equally distressed, simply asked, "You promised Mama would laugh here again." "How can you make sure if you leave?" Yates knelt to her level. "I meant what I said. But laughter takes time to grow back after it's been hurt. I'll help when I come visit, but you can help every day by being the brave girl I know you are." He stood and turned to Julianne, who was fighting to maintain her composure. She'd known him only 3 days, yet his departure left a surprising hollow feeling. "I'll return within 2 weeks," he said. "Sooner if I can manage it," she nodded, not trusting her voice. Unexpectedly, he reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You're stronger than you know, Julianne Crawford." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice stayed with her long after he'd ridden away, the children waving until he disappeared over the ridge. True to his word, Yates returned 11 days later. Julianne and the children were working in their struggling garden when they heard hoofbeats. Emma spotted him first. "Mr. Morgan," she shouted, dropping her hoe and running toward the approaching rider. Julianne straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. Yates wasn't alone. Behind him came a wagon loaded with supplies, driven by an older man with a shock of white hair. "Told you I'd be back," Yates called as he dismounted, catching Emma as she launched herself at him. Thomas was close behind, peppering him with questions before he could even properly greet them. Julianne approached more slowly, suddenly conscious of her work-worn appearance, hair escaping its bun, dirt smudging her faded dress. "Mrs. Crawford," Yates tipped his hat, his eyes warming as they took her in. "Hope you don't mind, but I brought along some things you might need." "This here is Hank Peterson, the Rocking MTK's foreman." The older man nodded respectfully. "Madam, Yates here hasn't stopped talking about your situation since he got back. Thought we might lend a hand." Julianne bristled slightly at your situation, but managed a polite smile. "That's very kind, but as I told Mr. Morgan, it's not charity," Yates interrupted firmly. "The boss heard about those rustlers being on your land. He's offering fair trade for keeping an eye on this section of the range. We lose too many cattle through here." She raised an eyebrow, suspecting this was at least partly fabricated, but Yates met her gaze steadily. "Consider it payment in advance," he added, "for services rendered." After a moment's hesitation, Julianne nodded. "Then we accept, thank you." The wagon contained more than she could have imagined: sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, salt pork, dried beans, even a bolt of sturdy fabric. There were also tools, nails, a new axe head to replace her broken one, and seed for winter wheat. "The boss also sent this," Hank said, handing over a small envelope. Inside, Julianne found $20 more cash than she'd seen since Michael died. "I can't," she began. "It's an advance," Yates said firmly. "For watching the south pasture, we need someone here, Mrs. Crawford. It benefits the Rockingham as much as you." She recognized the pride-saving lie for what it was, but accepted it gratefully. Hank left after helping unload, but Yates stayed. Over the next few days, he and Julianne worked side by side, preparing her homestead for the coming winter. He showed her how to properly bank the cabin walls with dirt for insulation, how to store vegetables in the root cellar he helped dig, and how to repair the chicken coop to keep predators out. In the evenings, he told stories that made the children giggle and, increasingly, brought smiles to Julianne's face as well. She found herself watching his hands as he whittled a small wooden horse for Thomas, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he laughed, the gentleness with which he treated her children. On his fourth evening, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire while Yates mended a harness and Julian worked on turning the new fabric into a dress for Emma. "Why are you really doing all this?" she asked suddenly, the question that had been burning inside her finally escaping. Yates's hands stilled on the leather. "What do you mean? This can't all be about watching for rustlers. The rocking M must have proper hands for that." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he set the harness aside. "When I was 12, my pa died in a mining accident," he said, staring into the fire. "Left my ma with 5 kids and a played-out claim in Nevada. Nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, a rancher named Dawson. That man brought us food, taught my older brother and me to hunt, helped fix our roof before winter." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "He didn't have to, but he did, said that's how the West survives, people helping each other through the hard times. And that's why you're helping us, partly." His voice softened. "But I also admire what you're trying to do here, Julian. It takes courage to stay and fight for a dream, especially one that wasn't originally yours." "Sometimes I think it's not courage but foolishness," she admitted, "or just having nowhere else to go." "Sometimes courage looks like that from the inside," he smiled. "Besides, your children need this place. I've seen how they come alive here despite the hardships." Julian nodded, thinking of Emma's delight in her small flower garden and Thomas's pride when he collected eggs without breaking them. "They do love it here, it's just what? Lonely," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. In the firelight, something shifted in Yates's expression. He moved to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "It doesn't have to be," he said quietly, "not always." Her heart stuttered at his nearness, at the implication of his words. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as anything but a widow, a mother, a struggling homesteader. "I should check on the children," she said, rising abruptly. If Yates was disappointed by her retreat, he didn't show it. "Of course." That night, lying awake in her bed, Julian acknowledged the feelings she'd been trying to ignore. She was attracted to Yates Morgan, his strength, his kindness, his easy way with her children. But the thought of opening her heart again terrified her. Losing Michael had nearly broken her. She wasn't sure she could survive another loss. The next morning, Yates announced he needed to return to the Rocking M. "The boss will be wondering where I've disappeared to," he explained over breakfast, not quite meeting her eyes. "Of course," Julian said, ignoring the sinking feeling in her stomach. Had she offended him with her abrupt departure the night before, the children immediately protested, but Yates promised to return soon. "I'll be back before the first snow," he assured them. With more stories and maybe even some candy from town. As he saddled his now recovered horse, Julian followed him to the barn. "Thank you again," she said formally, "for everything." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Julian, about last night, please," she interrupted. "There's no need to explain. You've been more than kind and I've been grateful." Something like hurt flashed across his face. "Is that what you think, that I've been helping because I expect something in return?" "No, of course not." She flushed. "I just meant I care about you," he said bluntly. "You and the children, not out of pity or duty, but because in the short time I've known you, I've come to admire your strength, your determination, your love for your children." Julian stood speechless, her heart pounding. "I'm not asking for anything," Yates continued more gently. "I know you're still grieving, I know the children come first, but I wanted you to know that when I come back, and I will come back, it's because I want to be here with all of you." Before she could respond, Emma called from the house, breaking the moment. "Think about what I said," Yates murmured, then led his horse out of the barn. Julian watched him ride away, her emotions in turmoil. Part of her wanted to call him back, to explore these unexpected feelings. But another part, the part still raw with grief and fear, was relieved at the reprieve. The days after Yates's departure stretched long and quiet. The children asked about him constantly, and Julian found herself watching the horizon more often than she cared to admit. But there was work to be done: winter wheat to plant, preserves to put up, repairs to complete with the supplies Yates had brought. 2 weeks passed, then 3. October brought the first frost, shriveling the last of the garden produce. Julianne tried not to worry, telling herself Yates had ranch duties that kept him away. But as the days grew shorter and colder, doubt crept in. Perhaps he'd thought better of involving himself with a widow and 2 children. Perhaps his words had been nothing more than kindness. Then came the early storm. It struck with little warning, a howling norther that brought sleet and snow in its wake. Julianne hurried to secure the animals and gather extra firewood, working frantically as the temperature plummeted. By nightfall, snow was piling against the cabin walls, and the wind found every crack and crevice. Huddled by the fire with Emma and Thomas, wrapped in every blanket they owned, Julianne tried to keep her fear at bay. This wasn't a full winter storm it would pass, but it was a harsh reminder of what lay ahead. She thought of Michael's final days, of his fever and labored breathing, and held her children closer. "Mama, I'm cold," Thomas whimpered. "I know, sweetheart. Let's tell stories to keep our minds off it." But her usual tales of princesses and knights seemed hollow against the howling wind. "Tell us about when you met Papa," Emma suggested, shivering despite the blankets. Julianne smiled sadly. "It was at a church social in Philadelphia. He was visiting his cousin, and I was helping serve lemonade. He spilled his glass all over my new dress, and I was so angry I wouldn't speak to him. But he kept apologizing," Thomas continued, familiar with the story. "Yes, he followed me around all evening, trying to make amends. By the end of the night, I'd forgiven him. 6 months later, we were married." She stroked Emma's hair. "He was so excited when we learned you were coming, Emma. Said you'd be beautiful like me, though I think you got his eyes." "And me?" Thomas asked sleepily. "You were born right before we decided to come west. Papa said you'd grow up strong and free here with room to run and explore." "Like a cowboy," Thomas murmured. "Yes, like a cowboy." Julianne thought of Yates, wondering where he was in this storm, safe at the ranch, she hoped. Eventually, the children drifted to sleep against her, but Julianne remained awake, listening to the storm's assault. Just before dawn, another sound cut through the wind, a pounding at the door. Heart racing, she carefully extricated herself from the children and grabbed her rifle. "Who's there?" She called, "Julianne, it's Yates." She flung the door open to find him snow-covered and half-frozen, leading 2 horses laden with supplies. "Thank God," he breathed, stumbling inside. "I was afraid the storm had caught you unprepared. What are you doing out in this?" She demanded, helping him remove his ice-encrusted coat. "Trying to reach you before it hit," he said, his teeth chattering. "Got delayed by a broken wagon axle. By the time I fixed it, the storm was closing in. Decided to push through anyway. You could have frozen to death." "Wouldn't be the first time I've ridden through worse." But his blue-tinged lips belied his casual tone. Julianne pushed him toward the fire, wrapping him in a blanket. "The horses, I'll see to them," she insisted. "You get warm." By the time she returned from stabling the horses and bringing in the supplies, more food, thicker blankets, winter clothes for the children, Yates had regained some color. Emma and Thomas, awakened by his arrival, were peppered him with questions. "Did you bring candy?" Thomas asked hopefully. Yates laughed. "I did, but your mama will have to decide when you can have it." "Are you staying?" Emma's question held more weight. Yates glanced at Julianne. "If your mama doesn't mind, I thought I might stay until the storm passes. Wouldn't want to freeze solid trying to get back to the ranch." "Of course you'll stay," Julianne said firmly. "It would be foolish to go back out in this." The storm raged for 3 days. During that time, Yates became truly part of their small household. He taught Thomas how to whittle, showed Emma how to play checkers with a set he'd brought, and spent long hours with Julianne, discussing everything from books they'd read to dreams they'd harbored. On the second evening, after the children were asleep, Yates confessed the real reason for his delayed return. "I took on extra work," he explained as they sat by the fire. "Drove a herd to the railhead for extra pay, wanted to bring more supplies for winter." Julianne stared at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, I wanted to." He hesitated. "There's something else. The boss has offered me a piece of land about 100 acres that borders your property to the west. Said I've earned it after 5 years of loyal service." That's wonderful, she said, genuinely pleased for him. You'll be a landowner. It's good grazing land with a creek running through it. I'm thinking of starting my own small herd. He looked at her intently. It would mean I'd be building nearby. We'd be neighbors in truth. The implication hung in the air between them. Yates, she began, uncertain what to say. I'm not rushing you, he assured her. I just wanted you to know my intentions. I care deeply for you, Julian, and for Emma and Thomas. I'd like the chance to show you what kind of life we might build together when you're ready. In the firelight, his face was earnest, his eyes full of a hope that called to something long dormant within her. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. Of what? Of feeling too much. Of losing again. She looked down at her hands. Of failing you somehow. Yates moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. Julian, look at me. When she did, he continued, life comes with no guarantees. I can't promise we won't face hardships or sorrows. But I can promise that you won't face them alone, not if you'll have me by your side. Tears filled her eyes. The children need a father who will love them as his own. I already do. His voice roughened. And you need someone who sees your strength, your heart, your beauty inside and out. Someone who will stand with you through whatever comes. Is that what you're offering? She whispered. It is, not today perhaps, or tomorrow, but someday when you're ready, I'm offering forever. Julian saw the truth of it in his eyes, felt it in the gentle pressure of his hands holding hers. Here was a man who had ridden through a blizzard to ensure her family's safety, who saw her not as a burden to be carried, but as a partner to be cherished. Slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, tentative and sweet, but it carried the promise of more to come. I'm not ready for forever yet, she said as she pulled back, but I think I might be someday soon. Yates's smile lit his entire face. Someday soon is all I ask for. When the storm finally cleared, Yates did not immediately return to the Rockingham. Instead, he spent the next week helping Julian finish preparations for winter. Together, they repaired the chicken coop, reinforced the barn roof, and ensured the root cellar was properly stocked. The children blossomed under his attention. Thomas followed him everywhere, soaking up cowboy knowledge like a sponge, while Emma showed him her treasured collection of pretty stones and bird feathers. In the evenings, Yates taught them songs and games, filling the small cabin with laughter that had been absent for too long. Julian found herself smiling more, even laughing at Yates's droll stories about ranch life. One evening, as they all sat around the table playing a game of Yates's invention involving cards and beans as counters, Thomas suddenly exclaimed, "Mama, you're laughing here again, just like Mr. Morgan promised." The table went quiet as everyone turned to look at her. Julian realized with surprise that Thomas was right. The sound she'd just made a full, throaty laugh at Yates's theatrical dismay over losing his beans was genuine, perhaps the first real laugh since Michael's death. I suppose I am, she said softly, meeting Yates's gaze across the table. His eyes were warm with something that made her heart beat faster. Told you this was a good place for laughter to grow back, he said simply. When it came time for Yates to return to the ranch, the parting was easier than before. His land adjoined hers now. He'd signed the papers in town just days earlier, and he would be back to start building a cabin in the spring. I'll come check on you every week, he promised as he prepared to leave. More often if the weather allows, Julian nodded, no longer afraid to show how much she would miss him. We'll be fine, you've made sure of that. I know you will. He hesitated, then leaned down to kiss her cheek, his beard tickling her skin, but I'll worry anyway. True to his word, Yates returned regularly throughout the winter. Sometimes he stayed only long enough to deliver supplies and ensure all was well. Other times he remained for days, especially when storms threatened. Each visit deepened the connection between them, each departure a little harder to bear. By February, Julian knew with certainty that she was falling in love with him. It wasn't the same as what she'd felt for Michael that had been the heady rush of first love, of youth and dreams untested by hardship. This was steadier, deeper, built on shared work and mutual respect, on seeing each other at their most vulnerable and choosing to stand together anyway. When spring finally arrived, melting the last of the snow and bringing new life to the land, Yates began construction on his cabin. It was a sturdy structure, larger than Julian's, with room to expand. "Building for the future," he explained when she commented on its size. The children spent every possible moment at the construction site, fascinated by the process. Thomas proudly helped carry smaller logs, while Emma appointed herself in charge of bringing water to the workers Yates and 2 men he'd hired from town. One evening in late May, with his cabin nearly complete, Yates invited Julian and the children to dine with him at his new home. He'd prepared a simple meal of beans, biscuits, and rabbit stew, served on a table he'd crafted himself. After they'd eaten, Yates suggested the children explore the small creek that ran behind the cabin. When they'd run off, he turned to Julian, suddenly serious. "I have something to ask you," he said, reaching for her hand across the table. Julian's heart quickened. "Yes." "These past months have been the happiest of my life, despite the work and worry. Being with you and the children, watching you all grow stronger, seeing your smile return, it's more than I ever hoped for." He rose and came around the table, then knelt before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small silver ring set with a single pearl. "Julianne Crawford, I love you. I love your strength, your gentleness, your determination. I love Emma and Thomas as if they were my own. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of joining our lives and lands together?" Tears filled Julian's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Yates Morgan, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added, "I love you too. I think perhaps I have since you promised Thomas I would laugh here again." His smile was luminous. "And have you laughed here again?" "Yes," she said, leaning forward to kiss him properly. "Thanks to you, I have." They were married in June of 1877, beneath the cottonwood trees that grew along the creek, dividing their properties, though, as Yates pointed out, it was all one property now, their land, just as their lives were joined. The ceremony was small but joyful. The rocking MTK's owner and his wife attended, along with Hank and a few other hands. The circuit preacher performed the service, and Emma proudly served as her mother's attendant, wearing a new dress Julian had sewn for the occasion. Thomas stood tall beside Yates, taking his role as best man very seriously, despite barely understanding what it meant. As they spoke their vows, Julian felt Michael's memory not as a shadow over her happiness, but as a blessing upon it. He would have wanted this for her, for all of them, a new beginning, a chance for joy. That night, after the children were asleep in their room at Yates's cabin, now their family home, Julian lay in her new husband's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. "Did you ever imagine this when you rode up to my homestead that first morning?" she asked, tracing the scar on his arm where the bullet had grazed him. "Not specifically," he admitted, his fingers playing with her unbound hair. "But I knew from that first day that you were someone special. Someone worth coming back for. Even with 2 children and a failing farm, especially with them." He kissed her forehead. "You weren't failing, Julian. You were surviving against terrible odds. I just helped even those odds a bit." She raised herself on one elbow to look at him properly. "You did far more than that. You brought laughter back to our home. You showed me that life could be good again. And you showed me what having a family really means." His voice grew husky. "I was just a drifting cowhand before I met you. Now I'm a husband, a father, a landowner with roots and purpose." "Speaking of family," Julian said, a smile playing at her lips, "I've been meaning to tell you something." Yates raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Come winter, there will be another Morgan in this house." His eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Julian felt her heart might burst with happiness. "Really?" he whispered. "You're certain?" She nodded. "Dr. Peterson confirmed it when we were in town yesterday." Yates pulled her close, his embrace gentle but fierce. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "So much." "And I love you," she replied, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The years that followed brought both joys and sorrows, as all lives do. Their daughter, Rebecca, was born on a snowy December night, with Emma proudly assisting the doctor. 2 years later, twin boys Michael and Joseph joined the family, completing their circle. The combined homestead flourished under their joint care. Yates's small cattle herd grew steadily, while Julian's garden expanded into a profitable venture, supplying vegetables to the growing town 15 miles away. Emma, displaying her grandfather's medical interest, began studying with the local doctor when she turned 16. Thomas, true to his early inclinations, became a skilled horseman, helping Yates with the ranch and occasionally working cattle drives. There were hardships: a drought that nearly ruined them in '82, a bout of scarlet fever that frightened them all when it swept through the children, but through it all, they stood together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. On their 10th anniversary, Yates surprised Julian with a new rocking chair for the porch, lovingly crafted by his own hands. "For watching sunsets," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. "When we're old and gray with grandchildren at our feet." "It's beautiful," she said, sitting in it experimentally. "Perfect." That evening, as the older children supervised the younger ones' games, Yates and Julian sat together on the porch, her in her new chair, him on the step beside her. The setting sun painted the land in gold and crimson, highlighting the prosperous ranch their joined efforts had created. "Do you ever regret it?" Julian asked suddenly. "Taking on a widow with 2 children, there must have been easier paths." Yates took her hand, running his thumb over the silver band that had been joined by a gold wedding ring. "Not for a single moment," he said with quiet conviction. "You and the children were never a burden, Julian. You were a gift I never expected to find." From inside came the sound of laughter, Emma teasing Thomas, the younger children's higher voices joining in. "Listen to that," Yates said, smiling. "Laughter growing, just like I promised." Julian squeezed his hand. "You kept that promise and so many more." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Julian reflected on the journey from grief to joy. She had come to this land broken by loss, uncertain of her future, afraid for her children's welfare. Now she sat surrounded by the life she and Yates had built together, a life richer and fuller than she could have imagined in those dark days. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how endings can become beginnings," she replied. "About how love finds us when we least expect it." He stood and drew her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "And how sometimes," he murmured against her lips, "the best stories start with a gunshot before dawn." Julian laughed, a free, joyous sound that echoed across the land they'd tamed together. "And end with laughter after dark," she finished, before kissing him beneath the star-filled Colorado sky.